Now dance for me!
What is stop motion? Stop motion is where you constantly take pictures to make the subject look like it's moving at the same normal frame rate as a video camera. Examples can include Clay World.
Check it out!
This is a YouTube series that uses blue clay in the shape of people to deliver black comedy in its videos. And there's also Creature Comforts. This is an Aardman series that uses plasticine in the shape of animals to create short episodes, in the style of normal people being interviewed. How does stop motion work? Stop motion works by simply taking pictures of a subject as it moves in a different spot. 24 frames are usually used to create motion in a second of a stop motion video. Persistence of vision. This is producing a vision of movement using still frames being played together at a fast speed to create the vision of movement. Now, what even is frames per second? FPS, or frames per second, is the rate at which an imaging device produces unique still images called frames. In this little stop motion video, there is roughly 3 frames per second. Different frame rates. PAL stands for Phase Alternating Line and is a color encoding system used for analog broadcasting TV systems. This uses 25 frames per second. The NTSC, named after the National Television System Committee, is a broadcasting system which was used in North America and Japan. By today's standards, most films have 24 frame rates per second, whilst films like Avatar and The Hobbit use 48 frames per second. The phenakistoscope was invented in 1832 by the Belgian physicist Joseph Plateau. It was an animation device that used a spinning disc of sequential images and the persistence of vision to create the illusion of movement. The zoetrope was invented in between 1833 and 1834 by British mathematician William George Horner. It is similar to the phenakistoscope, only it's a cylinder with a series of pictures on the inner surface that, when viewed through the slits of the cylinder rotating, give an impression of continuous motion. The praxinoscope was invented by Charles-Émile Reynaud in France in 1877 as a successor to the zoetrope. Like the zoetrope, it used a strip of pictures placed around the inner surface of a spinning cylinder, but it had a circle of mirrors in the middle and no slits around the shape, so people could see the images being animated throughout the reflection of the mirrors. The kinetoscope was invented by Thomas Edison in 1888. Unlike the zoetrope and the praxinoscope, a person would need to look for a peephole to see films designed to be viewed by one person at a time. It was basically like an early film projector. Stop motion has been around since the early days of film. In 1909, a film director known as J. Stuart Blanker used stop motion to animate some smoking equipment in the comedy film Princess Nicotine. But a young man called Willis O'Brien from Oakland, California, began to evolve stop motion into something more feature-length of American cinema. The first film he made, called The Dinosaur and the Missing Link, was made in 1915, and it took him 2 months to create, even though the actual film is only 5 minutes. The ape man in the film was referred to as an ancestor of King Kong. Willis's first ever feature-length film, The Lost World, impressed cinema audiences and became a 1925 box office success. Inside the dinosaurs were steel skeletal armatures that consisted of 100 joints. Willis designed the armatures himself, and he hired a talented artist, Marcel Delgato, to make the dinosaurs for the film. In 1930, Willis began work on an RKO production entitled Creation. In sub-test footage, he created a new system in which he can mix stop motion with live action photography. Because of this newfound technique, Willis used this for the rest of his career. Although RKO refused to screen Creation, a film producer known as Marion C. Cooper was impressed with the footage, and he hired Willis to supervise the special effects for the film The Ape Wonder, which was later retitled into King Kong. Willis designed the ape's steel armature to infuse the monster with character. The whole film itself took Willis and a small crew over a year to animate King Kong, but when the film opened in 1933, the film broke box office records and inspired a generation of effects artists. Many years later, a young man known as Ray Harryhausen made his amateur film with stop motion known as The Cave Bear. Since then, he developed his skills as an animator, creating short dinosaur films, and got to meet his idol, Willis O'Brien. Harryhausen started his first professional job after high school, animating for George Pal's Puppetoons. Afterwards, Harryhausen produced his own series of educational short films based on Mother Goose stories. Then in 1946, he received a phone call from Willis O'Brien, who was assembling a team for a new film which starred an ape like King Kong. The film was entitled Mighty Joe Young. Harryhausen designed Mighty Joe's armature, which was 2 inches shorter than Kong's armature, but was lighter to hold. Harryhausen had accomplished 85% of the stop motion happening in the film. He even spent some time at the zoo studying gorilla behavior, giving the ape star a distinct personality. Even though the character was not as popular as King Kong, many had considered the character to be superior, and because of the whole film in general, Willis O'Brien won an Academy Award in 1949. Later on, Harryhausen collaborated with producer Charles Schneer to bring an ancient mythology to life on screen. With their first film, Jason and the Argonauts, audiences were impressed with the creatures when they first appeared on screen, especially the sword-wielding skeletons, which were animated by the most complex stop-motion sequences ever. It took him 4.5 months to complete the scene. But Harryhausen's favorite character that he animated was Medusa, which he introduced in another film, Clash of the Titans. Harryhausen is recognized as a grandmaster of stop-motion animation. For 30 years, cinemas were packed full of people who wanted to marvel at Harryhausen's mythological movie animation. As it was practiced during Willis O'Brien's and Ray Harryhausen's time, stop motion is still being practiced today. At one point, Ken Blanchett at Kyoto Brothers Productions were animating for a Japanese advert produced by the Sentei Services Corporation. Today's stop-motion animation now uses simple editing programs like Final Cut Pro and other programs which can be used like Windows Movie Maker. Another stop-motion animator who coexisted with Kyoto Brothers Productions was Phil Tippett. In his California film studio, he designed heroes and villains for some of Hollywood's famous movies like RoboCop. He was also an original member of George Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic, and worked with John Berg in the stop-motion animation department for Star Wars Episode V, The Empire Strikes Back. Their challenge was to try and animate the giant Imperial walkers in the battle near the beginning. The snow they are walking on is simulated by baking soda. The aliens that the rebels are riding, known as the Tauntauns, are also animated by stop motion. But to make them move more quickly, they had to use a technique called motion blur. This is when an object is blurred in each frame whilst moving. This technique was also applied in Tippett's next project, Dragon Slayer. Tippett designed the dragon itself, but Stuart Ziff, an engineer, created a movement system called the Dragon Mover. This allowed the dragon to move with 6 motor-driven rods, with 4 of each leg, 1 for the body and 1 for the head and neck. In the midst of fast-moving objects and technological advances, Tippett continued to work with the eyes and hands of stop-motion animator. He worked as the dinosaur supervisor for Jurassic Park, which had used stop-motion in many key scenes and were generated on screen with CGI. In 1965, Peter Lord and his colleague David Sproxton started to make their first stop-motion animation using paper cutouts and chalk drawings. In the same year, they produced a second short film, this time using people dressed up and running about on a field. In 1966, they produced a cartoon known as Aardman, which they got the name of the animation studio from, and thus, in 1972, Aardman Animations was born. Their most popular works include Wallace and Gromit, Morph, and Shaun the Sheep. Who is Tim Burton? Tim Burton is a filmmaker and animator who often creates gothic and surreal films like Edward Scissorhands and Mars Attacks. In 1993, he wrote and produced a stop-motion film entitled The Nightmare Before Christmas. The film instantly became a cult film and received critical acclaim. 3 years later, Tim Burton produced another film with director Henry Selick, who also directed Nightmare Before Christmas, which mixed live action with stop motion. The film was an adaptation of James and the Giant Peach, which mostly received positive reviews and got nominated for an Academy Award for Best Music, Original Musical or Comedy Score by Randy Newman. In 2005, Tim Burton directed his first full-length stop-motion film, The Corpse Bride, which got nominated for the 78th Academy Awards for Best Animated Feature, but it lost to Wallace & Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. In 2012, Burton directed Frankenweenie, which was not a musical unlike the other stop-motions he has worked on. Nonetheless, the film received good reviews, and it won 8 film awards. Laika is another stop-motion studio that, like Tim Burton, mostly creates wacky horror and fantasy films. It was founded in 2005 by co-founder and chairman of Nike Incorporated, Phil Knight, and animated film director and producer, Will Vinton. In 2009, Laika released its first full-length stop-motion film, Coraline, which was directed by Nightmare Before Christmas's Henry Selick. The film received critical acclaim and was a box office success. In 2012, Laika released their second stop-motion film, Paranorman, following the success of Coraline. The film had opened to positive critical response, and it received nominations for BAFTA for Best Animated Film and Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. In 2014, the company released its third film, The Box Trolls, which was the first film that was not co-distributed by Universal Studios. The film was received positively by critics, and it received an Academy Award nomination for Best Animated Feature. Is there a threat to stop-motion animation? In 1984, an animation studio located in California, known as Pixar, released their first computer-animated short film, The Adventures of Andre and Wally-B. The short film was successful, and it was followed by other short films over the years like Luxo Jr. and Tin Toy. Eventually, Pixar released their first ever feature-length film, Toy Story, in 1995. The film was a box office hit, and it was considered to be one of the greatest films of all time. In 1994, DreamWorks SKG was founded by film director Steven Spielberg, music executive David Geffen, and former Disney executive Jeffrey Katzenberg. In 1998, DreamWorks released its first computer-animated film, Ants, which rivaled and released in the same year as Pixar's A Bug's Life. Although it received more positive reviews than its rival, Ants failed to top A Bug's Life in the box office. In 2004, DreamWorks released its animation department as an individual studio dedicated to creating animated films like Shrek and Madagascar. Since computer-generated imagery, or CGI, was introduced in the sci-fi western Westworld, it has been practiced, developed, and relied on throughout films like Westworld's sequel, Future World, and epic blockbusters such as Star Wars Episode IV: A New Hope. In modern films like Avatar and Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy, a lot of CGI is needed to give Pandora and Middle-earth a breathtaking look. Because of the introduction of CGI and computer animation, stop-motion is practiced less and less by the film industry. But, with Aardman releasing a Shaun the Sheep movie this year, and Laika working on its next film, Kubo and the Two Strings, set to release next summer, and with some YouTubers practicing stop-motion animation for their channels, stop-motion may look like a dying art, but it is not dead yet.